So I could always write. I used to write poems and stuff like that when I was little. And speaking is just an extension of writing in a lot of ways, being able to form your thoughts and your words. I've tried to wield it in a responsible manner. I don't just want to be another out there being opinionated about stuff just to get a rise out of people. I've tried to wield that responsibility in a just manner. And, I have a lot of followers on, social media, like 150,000 on LinkedIn alone. I think I owe it to those people to just speak honestly, speak the truth, and, be kind, be a light.
Welcome to another episode of the Doctors and Dollars podcast. I'm your host, Nate Crannell, joined today by Dr. Louis Profeta. Dr. Profeta is a nationally recognized award-winning writer and emergency physician at St. Vincent Hospital of Indianapolis. He's clinical instructor of emergency medicine at Indiana University and Marian University Schools of Medicine. He's a dynamic and sought-after public speaker, and his best-selling book, The Patient in Room 9 Says He's God, continues to earn critical acclaim as a poignant and passionate look at society, God, and life through the eyes of an ER doctor. Welcome to the show, Dr. Profeta.
Hey, thank you for having me.
What is going well today?
Well, I woke up alive. That's a good way of starting the day. Everything else is icing on the cake. If you wake up, open your eyes, and the sun's out or the air's, you can breathe the air, and you put your feet on the ground, everything's golden from that point on.
Have you always had that view of life, or has being an ER doctor kind of opened your eyes to be like, hey, listen, if we wake up, breathe in, and we can get ourselves vertical, it's going to be a good day?
No, that's a mature mindset you have when you're 60, when you turn 60. Of course not. Okay, when you're younger, you don't appreciate those little things, like being able to get up and move your bowels and take a pee and things like that. That's what, you're off to a good start.
There you go. As long as the bodily functions work in this day and age.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Well, you said it. I want to start back at your beginnings. So after med school, you went to the University of Indiana, and then you went on to the University of Pittsburgh.
Correct.
What attracted you to emergency medicine?
Well, initially I wanted to be a hand surgeon. And I had spent a lot of time sort of scrubbing in on hand cases, but I would have really bad neck pain in the operating room. And I had suffered a spinal injury when I was 17 years old in a fall. I had broken my neck, and my neck was wired. And my friend, who was a neurosurgeon, said, listen, that's just going to get worse over the years, and you're not going to be able to hunker down over an operating table without having extreme amount of pain. And at the same time, I was working in the emergency department in our hospital, and emergency medicine was a sort of a new and upcoming field, and I really fell in love with emergency medicine. I loved the variety. I loved talking to people. You never knew from minute to minute what would come in through the door at the next moment. And that was in, you're talking about late 80s. And I said, I think this is what I want to do. And I went into emergency medicine, did a residency in the University of Pittsburgh.
I mean, even let's say you went the surgeon route, was the back injury, you mentioned like your neck was hurting from.
Yeah, I broke my neck.
In surgery, is it more? Yeah. Okay, so you're at your neck. So is it more neck?
Correct. Yeah, my
kind
neck.
of bending down during surgery, or is it more of a pivot in your hips?
No, just leaning over the table. And I would notice that when I would be studying, or for prolonged periods of time, I really have to position myself, and it's not like you can position the patient better. You can only do so much. You can move a book around. You can prop your feet up on the wall and read and study, but you can't move a body part around just because your neck hurts. So I said, what, this isn't for me. It wasn't enjoyable because it was so uncomfortable that I knew I needed to find something else. And I found something else that I actually probably am a lot better at anyways. And really,
there you go. Yeah, wouldn't it be nice though if the table's sitting flat, if there's a way you could just kind of rotate it?
Yeah, sure. Maybe into face
to face you like a
exactly
without all the internal organs kind of sliding down.
Right.
But hey, this day and age, modern technology and medicine, I'm sure they'll come up with that at some point in the future. It'll be long after we're gone though.
or they won't need us.
Well, after becoming, yeah, exactly. That could be too. That could be a whole podcast conversation in itself, just talking about the technology and the AI coming out. But after you became attending, right? Talk me through like your first few months in the ER. Like, was it what you expected because you got a ton of experience as a resident, or was it like, holy cow, what did I get myself into?
Well, no, I got a ton of experience as a medical student. I was working in our ERs, not only just doing my normal clinical rotations of medical school, but I had a part-time job working as that's what they called an extern back then. It was almost like being a junior doctor, but you got paid for it. And I would, maybe most students might do 1 or 2 shifts a month in the ER just to make a few extra bucks on the side. I was doing, 10, 12 shifts a month in addition to my full-time clinical rotations because I loved it. I loved it so much. And so by the time I got to residency, I think I'd already done the equivalent of like 6 months of residency just working as an ER, sort of junior doctor in training in the emergency department. So I think that the only, and then when I was in residency, we had the opportunity at University of Pittsburgh to moonlight, so we could go out to some of these smaller underserved areas and work in their ERs. And I think that getting out there for the first time by yourself, where you don't have anybody to fall back on, that was sort of that aha moment, that mind-numbing moment that was full of anxiety and stuff like that. But now, I got about like 160,000 patients under my belt. Nothing phases me anymore. But though every time I say I've seen it all, 5 minutes later, all walks in the room, so it's never that way. So, it's interesting.
Yeah, number 1,060 and one
exactly.
Is that first one of you've never seen it before.
Right.
Well, that's incredible. 160,000 patients. You think back to the first 16 when you were, I think you said extern, and kind of that junior doctor. Like, is that still a thing? Like, even today, like St. Vincent's, do you guys have people that come in as externs, or is that no?
No, sadly we don't. We have medical students, but they can't do anywhere near as much as what we used to be able to do back then. It's just sort of the way documentation is, and electronic medical record keeping, and medical liability and stuff like that, which is really sort of sad. But we got so much more experience, I think, clinically back then, because we could write orders, we could do procedures, we could document in the chart, and the attendings would just sort of sign our charts. And now it's just not that way. Now you're just sort of, you can't really let them go off on their own. You've got to be right on top of it.
There's got to be a level of regulation in there that just wasn't around back then.
Right.
What's the craziest thing you saw early on that you're like, man, this is the craziest thing I'm ever going to see, versus getting closer to 160,000 patients? You're like, now that's the craziest thing I've seen.
God, I don't know. Everybody has every ER doc in America has the exact same, orifice stories and stuff like that. But I remember when I was in residency, and it's still probably one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. I did an x-ray on an elderly nursing home patient that was, she was like 95 years old, maybe horribly demented, very thin, and she had the large mass in her abdomen. And I had done an x-ray, I put the x-ray up on the board, and I said, oh my gosh, they did the x-ray on the wrong person. This woman is pregnant. And you could see a fully formed baby on the x-ray. And I double checked and said, wait, no, this is the same patient. There's no way this 95-year-old woman is pregnant. And it didn't quite look right. And talked to radiology, and she had what's called a stone baby. She had probably a fetal demise, almost full term, when she was probably in her teens or, early in her life. And she never expelled the baby. And it became sort of mummified and calcified in her abdomen. And usually those people die. They get septic and stuff, but she didn't for whatever reason, and it's extremely rare. But I think that's probably the most interesting thing I've ever seen. But I was talking to some of our docs the other day. I said I used to take care of patients early in my career that had parents that were slaves. that's how old they were. I mean, realize I've been doing this 34 years, and so in the 1980s, I would occasionally take care of people who had parents that were sold into slavery, were on plantations and stuff like that. I mean, I remember taking care of a guy who was in the Spanish-American War. I mean, we take care of World War I vets. I think that, some of the stories that the veterans tell us, oh my gosh, they're just some of the most amazing people, and I've written about it, quite extensively in some of my short writings. I mean, those are fascinating things. I mean, we all have the same tragic things that we see. Nothing's more tragic than the next. But I mean, the worst stuff I think any ER doc sees is how parents respond when they've been told that their kids have been killed. I mean, there's nothing that prepares you for that, and that's the stuff that wakes you up at night. That's the stuff that makes it hard to do this job. But it is what it is. You take the good and the bad.
Yeah, that scenario that you just said is the reason. Like, I could not do it. Yeah. I think that's I have 3 kids between the ages of 5 and 10.
Yeah.
And like, just losing a kid, I cannot even imagine. Like, losing my kid, I can't imagine that. But having to, more than probably once in your career, tell multiple parents that has happened.
Just did it 2 days ago. So as I always tell people, when they try to talk about love or why their kids engage in reckless behaviors and stuff like that. I mean, you yourself probably thought you knew what love was, but you had no idea its depth until you finally had a kid. And there's an incredible difference in your understanding of the world around you and how the world works once you have a child. Now, can you imagine that child faced with, a life-threatening disease or a situation, or can you imagine that kid dying? I mean, it's, and then, that's a reality that we deal with on a semi-daily basis, especially with the fentanyl epidemic and the opioid epidemic. We're going to lose 100,000 young people in America today. It's one of the reasons, I don't know if you noticed, Nate, that I travel America and I speak on college campuses all over this country about drug and alcohol abuse. I'm trying to get young people to keep from making stupid, life-altering decisions. It makes me have to go into the room and tell their mom and father they've been killed. So, that's the motivating driving factor behind it.
For sure. I mean, we were talking earlier about just perspective with age and making sure your bodily functions work to wake up each morning. But how does your perspective change? And maybe this is an emotional perspective, but how did that change when you started having kids? You and your wife have a few boys. Once you started having kids in this career, how did that change what that perspective looked like?
Oh my God.
But how did that change how those conversations with the parents who just lost their kids? How did those conversations?
There's a chapter in my book that deals with child abuse and neglect. And when my oldest boy, I think was like 2 years old or 4 years old, we had a young boy that was beaten to death here in our ER, and the mother's boyfriend beat him to death, and I couldn't get this kid back. And I had to, in fact, testify in the trial, the homicide trial. And I remember going home that night and crawling in bed with my kid and just crying. And I said, I think the Jewish prayer for the dead, for this kid who'd been beaten to death by his parents. I said it for a year every day when I got up. I figured if they weren't going to love this kid enough to keep him alive, at least I could try to love him a little bit in death. So, I mean, things like that change. And then I almost lost my son from cancer, my oldest boy. Thank God he's doing well. And it's one of the reasons why I travel America talking on college campuses, because I just don't want any other parents. I can keep maybe 1 or 2 kids from destroying their parents' lives. I think it's worth it. So it's something that I've sort of taken to heart and, try to be that light under the world, a little bit of a shining light open into dark places, and try to see if I can make a difference. This is one of the reasons why I'm still doing this job at 60 when everybody else is retired, because every day there's that chance that I may save one more life today, So why not keep going until I can't keep going?
Yeah, I mean, saving lives is what an honor. And I mean, we just met each other, and I thank you for that. But it's very cool.
Yeah,
the fact that you go out and you're going around to college.
Well, how do you do all this stuff with all that death. Well, we do save people too. And, so
Yeah.
actually, if this was a batting average, I'd be in the Hall of Fame because more of my patients live. So,
Good point.
It's
Great point.
and it's wondrous.
Well, even on top of saving lives, the impact that you're having on lives. You're going around the country talking about, alcoholism and drug abuse and everything that's going on with young kids today. Like, just think of the lives that you're impacting before they may never see an ER. Hopefully, cross your fingers.
I would hope
have to go to an ER.
I would hope so. I mean, I get emails from parents. It's. I think I know when it works when I get home or I'm driving home from a college talk, and some of these talks, man, I'll have like 3,000 students. I'll be driving home and I'll get an email from a parent saying, "Hey, my kid was just at your talk," and they called and apologized and cried on the phone and promised they would never ever do any of that stuff. I actually play a role of a father who's lost his kid and what it's like to go in and tell him and how the parent acts. And I bring sort of that reality. It's a very brutal, in-your-face, frank discussion, full of obscenities, full of real-time discussions. And I think what I bring is street cred. I've been out there in that world. And so I just try to bring that. I try to bring that to college campuses. And I got a lot of, private parent groups that hire me too, or a lot of schools that'll bring me in. And I'm glad to do it. It's pretty emotional. It's pretty exhausting, but it's incredibly rewarding. I literally just got a call today from my agent, and I'm going to Clemson to speak, and that'll be the entire fraternity and sorority system. I'm speaking in September. I'm speaking at University of South Carolina, going to Florida State, and then I think I'm going to Florida International right after that. I can't even keep track, but I've been everywhere from Kansas State to Washington to Utah to Tennessee to Kentucky to Arkansas State, Missouri State, Mississippi. You'd be hard pressed to find.
Well traveled.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's fun. I love meeting young people. They all need to have this discussion.
I mean, and the talk that you're giving, if it's anything, so let's talk about your TED Talk.
Okay.
So you did a TED Talk 7 years ago at Wabash University. That's actually what kind of brought me on. It popped up on LinkedIn. I watched it, and man, and I actually just watched it again yesterday. So I was aware of you a few months ago.
Oh, thanks.
I watched it again yesterday, and I've got to say, the way you deliver that sequence of different scenes and encounters that an ER doctor would have, it gives you seemingly every human emotion that you can have. I had it in that 19 minutes of that video. It's amazing.
Thank you. It's kind of you to say.
So kudos to you for delivering that. I was just sitting on my couch 4:00 yesterday afternoon, and
you ought to come to one of my drug and alcohol talks. You think that you like the TED Talk? Wait till you see this. You won't even be able to breathe after this.
I'm a big fan of whiskey and wine, so that would be. I'd probably give up drinking if I came to your talk.
Oh, I'm a bourbon and cigar guy, so you're not. Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Oh man, we might have to hang out.
Yes.
But I was watching it yesterday, and my kids walked by, and they're like, "What are you watching?" They could just tell I was welling up. But then I'm you feel anger at some of the ways that some of the scenarios that you're talking about. It's just all the emotions. So how many of those stories are true to you?
Oh.
And then how many of those did you just pick up from colleagues?
No, those are all mine. All those things that on that TED Talk are literally, every one of those things is literally things that I've said in the way, and people. Now I've changed their names in the areas where I use names, but every single one of those scenarios are things that played out in real time, and that's how they played out. And you mentioned the book. I'll hold it up. Patient Room 9 Says He's God. That's sort of a lot of what this book is about. It's sort of about the emergency department. I've said it many times, is like Ellis Island. It's if you think about it, Nate, it's the only place in the world where every single facet of society comes together in one place at one time, and you can have a crack baby in a room next to a CEO of a Fortune 500 company executive. You can have a movie star, Oscar-winning movie star, next to a demented schizophrenic who's naked and throwing human feces on the walls. I mean, literally, a premature baby in the room next to a one that you're maybe just born at 26 weeks next to a room of 105-year-old war vet. So every single facet of society, every single issue meets in the emergency department, and then they disperse themselves through the hospital with different zones. But that's the only place in the world where it all happens outside of a cemetery, where they all come together in one place. And man, I mean, think about the spirituality of that. And I've been in situations where we've had a chest open, where we're doing open heart massage and trying to take care of somebody who's dying, when a woman busted in through the doors and was screaming about the fact that she'd been waiting an hour and a half for somebody to see her for a sore throat.
Jeez.
I mean, you can't, you sit and you just, every single facet of the successes we have in society and the failures we have in society, they all have their example within the emergency department. So every problem that you see out in the world, we've already seen it 100-fold way before you're even aware of it. Whether it's societal problems, whether it's health problems, whatever it is, we know about it. We see it coming from outer space way before you do.
Yeah. So, I mean, that alone, it would be just emotionally, physically, sometimes maybe even spiritually taxing on you. What got you into public speaking to go out now and deliver all that, around the country?
Well, I mean, it's a pretty good message.
Yeah.
I mean, when COVID-19, for example, was happening, I was this, LinkedIn named me as one of the top voices in healthcare for COVID-19. In fact, I remember watching Fox News one night, and there was a radio, they were interviewing a talk show host on Fox News, and they were talking about Fauci and all these different issues, and he weighed in. He goes, "Quit listening to Dr. Fauci and just start paying attention to Dr. Profeta. He's an ER doc in Indianapolis." Wow. And I had to throw, oh my gosh, did he just say that? I'm sitting here just happened to be watching the TV, and I try to bring a realism about society and say, but like I was saying, when COVID-19 was happening, you were hearing all this stuff on the news and all these different pundits weighing in. I mean, we're right there. I'm sitting there in the middle of it.
Yep.
Okay, so nobody knew more about what was going on than the ER docs and the ICU docs all over America. And we're watching TV on, what are these people talking about? Just one after another. And so I sort of I relish having that insight. I don't want to say it's powerful, but it gives you a stronger voice. And I just decided a long time ago that I was tired of people saying stupid things and expressing, different opinions that maybe weren't in tune with what we were seeing, whether it was things that put children at risk or, this or that. And I just said, hey, listen, here's what we see. Here's how many patients we see. I've never seen what you're talking about, and I would have seen it, and just there's 1,000 things out there like that. There's so many things out there like that.
For sure. Hey, D&D podcast family. I want to take a quick break in this episode to share a little behind the scenes of why the Doctors and Dollars podcast and our Wealth Wednesday series were made and why they're important. We have a number of physicians in our Grand Vision family office, and through conversations with them, we realize there is a huge void in financial education for physicians. We don't have time to personally work with every doctor out there, so the podcast is a way for us to offer a resource where you can learn about physician-focused wealth strategies via Wealth Wednesday, while also learning from other doctors making a splash in the medical community via Doctors and Dollars. Providing value is our top priority, and if there's a specific question or topic that you want to hear about, just reach out to us on any social media platform or go to the Doctors and Dollars website, which is ddpod.com. Also, if you'd like to take your wealth plan to the next level and be a part of a community of money-minded physicians in our family office, we open applications just twice per year. You can explore and get more details about the next application period at grandvision.co. Now, back to the show. And to be able to share that then, I mean, you're well-spoken, you're well-written. Like, is that a skill that you've always had and you were just able to utilize that once COVID happened? Or, I mean, a lot of these things that you've done were pre-COVID even, but have you always been that way, or is that a skill that you picked up?
I mean, I did. I was always a good writer. I was a horrible student. I was not an honor student in high school at all, and In fact, early in my medical career, when I came back and practiced medicine in the very community, I grew up in, I mean, I'd take care of patients that went to high school with me, and they'd look at me and go, "Holy cow, I didn't know you were smart." So I don't remember your name ever appearing on the honor roll, because it didn't. Okay, I mean, I was a solid C student. I just barely got into college. But I knew I had the skill set. I just need to sit down and apply it. But I always had I could always write. And I took a creative writing course once in college, and the professor pulled me up after the first assignment. He said, "Don't take this class." And he goes, "I'll give you an A for the year, just write and give me some stuff." And he actually submitted one of my very first works to publication, and I was an undergrad, and I got published in JAMA, which is Journal of American Medical Association, for a creative writing piece I did. That looked awful good on my resume in medical school. So I could always write. I used to write poems and stuff like that when I was little. And speaking is just an extension of writing in a lot of ways, being able to form your thoughts or your words. And so I've tried to wield it in a responsible manner. I don't just want to be another asshole out there being opinionated about stuff just to get a rise out of people. I've tried to wield that responsibility in a just manner. And, I have a lot of followers on, social media, like 150,000 on LinkedIn alone. And I think I owe it to those people to just speak honestly, speak the truth, and, be kind, be a light.
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually noticed that. So as I was preparing for our conversation today, I read a lot of your work, probably 10, 12 articles that you've written, over the last decade. You have a really good way of incorporating passion into some, humor, sensibility. There's a sternness in some of them. Is like a, come on, get your head together, like just use your brain type of thing. Again, are those emotions?
And usually I'm saying that to myself. But, yeah.
are those emotions that you?
And I'm just projecting it on the general populace, but it's really me scolding myself.
That's good insight. Are those? I was gonna say, are a lot of those emotions or your way to talk to people? Is that a skill that you picked up over the 30 years of your career and the 160,000 people you've had to talk to, or have you just always been good at talking to people?
No, if you go back and you knew me in my early days in medical school and residency, I was pretty much a complete asshole back then. And can you say asshole on your podcast, Nate?
Absolutely.
I don't know. I assume you can. Okay. So yeah, I certainly am a different person. Okay. I'm more forgiving. I'm more let things slide kind of stuff. But I was pretty much a troublemaker early on. I'm not really that way as much now. I guess a troublemaker in a different way, sort of channeled in a good way. But I wasn't the most, I was a little bit self-destructive back then. But no, I'm a different person now. I think people that know me know that too.
And that's kind of where I was going with that question.
I almost lost a kid too, and almost having a kid die of cancer and spending 7 months in the ICU while I was in college. I look at the world a lot different. I'm an exponentially better father now than I was before my kid got sick, and I think an exponentially better person. I like to think I am.
Sure.
More empathetic.
I had to spend 7 days in a NICU after my son was born, so I can't imagine 7 months in an ICU.
I slept in a chair next to his bed for 7 months.
That's unbelievable. What kind of cancer was it, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, he had leukemia, but he's doing great. He's 30 years old. I just need to get him married. Yeah. I need grandbabies. I'll start playing with grandkids. Oh, man.
That's a good point. Just tell yourself, be like, hey, I'm 60 now. Like, we need to get our shit together here.
Exactly. Well, they're great. They're so much fun, though. They're great kids. I've been blessed. I got 3 wonderful boys that are just the best men that I've ever known in my life. I am so much of a much better person for having them as my sons. I learned so much from them and from my wife. And, we spend our free times whenever, my favorite thing to do with them is we park our butts on the back porch. We put a big TV out there and we watch UFC fights.
Yes.
And we gamble on the fights, smoke cigars and drink bourbon. And every Saturday we're watching either the UFC fights or watching Dana White Contender Series. We just gotten into it, and I love it. It's just great.
That is
it's so much fun.
And the memories you're making.
Yeah.
I mean, for something so simple as sitting there watching fights, they're going to remember that forever. So that's cool.
It's crazy. And I pulled a bunch of my partners into it too. So, like, a lot of my doctor friends will call up and say, "Hey, you guys watching the fights in the back porch?" And say, yeah. Next thing you know, we got like 20 people, watching the fights, and people that would never in a million years think they would watch something like this. Next you know, we've got all the betting apps out, and we're all betting and gambling and yelling at the TV. That's our howl at the moon kind of moment.
There you go. Those are great memories. Well, one thing I was going to bring up, one of the writings of yours that I read, because a lot of them incorporate medicine or healthcare in some matter, but you have one that caught my eye the other day, and I'm just curious what brought on this topic. So it's called "Buy Your Kid a Pile of Dirt." And so I read that, and I'm laughing the whole time I read it. My wife's like, what are you reading? And it's like, so I grew up in West Central Iowa. I grew up in West Central Iowa in a town of like 1,500 people, like playing on piles of dirt, playing on piles of snow with Matchbox cars and tractors. Like, that's how I grew up. And so, like, what brought on that topic to write about that?
I can't remember that. I wish I remember that article. I remember that it was a kid that I think came in with a broken arm or something like that. He was either jumping a bike over a dirt pile, and I think his parents were scolding him, or he was covered in mud. And all I remember thinking was, good for you, kid. Yeah. Good for you. I mean, it was such a joy to see some kid getting hurt, just being a kid and doing young boy stuff, and we just don't see that anymore. And, most of the kids' injuries that we see are, he got hurt sliding into second base at travel baseball. No, he's a really good baseball player. It's like, I don't care. Mm-hmm. I want to know that, and I look back at my friendships and the kids that we were friends with and stuff when we were little. Man, playing out in the fields and catching grasshoppers and digging forts and taking a Schwinn Stingray and jumping it over a garbage can with an old piece of plywood and knocking out your teeth and, just getting in scrapes and doing stuff like that. Man, that was just the best. It was the best.
It's the way you should grow up.
So I tried to capture that.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
Far too often, you might even see this where you get, I want to say kids, but even maybe adults that come in with like, man, I got a sore neck or my arms hurt. It's like, yeah, because you're sitting there looking at a phone or an iPad all day or playing video games.
Doing nothing. You got to be out there. I have a big garden in my yard. I grow cucumbers. I make pickles. I have peppers and everything like that. I'm outside digging in dirt every day, every chance that I can get. Or I'm out fishing, or we're hunting, or I mountain bike still. I'm 60 and I'll try to ride, 50 to 100 miles a week on a mountain bike. But you need to be out. You need to be in the dirt. You need to get your hands dirty, connected to nature, and so I look back and a pile of dirt, man, it is the best. A construction site's the best play site in the world for a kid.
You're absolutely right.
And if you can steal your sister's Barbies and set them on fire too, even better. The G.I. Joes all melding together.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, man, all those hobbies you just mentioned, you might want to keep that on the down low. Your disability insurance provider might be watching this, and I don't.
That's true. That's true.
Man. I'm going to shift gears on you for a second because I want to talk about your writing. A lot of the writing that you had, at least that I was looking at, was, in the last decade. A lot of it 2014 to 2020. But you mentioned this small pandemic event that we had 4 years ago. I don't know if you remember it or not, but what was the ER like? Let's say April, May, June of 2020 in Indianapolis. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, well, did you happen to read the article I wrote called "What Scares Me More Than Ebola"? Because that is an article you should read. So I had written an article back in when Ebola was all the rage, that I was predicting a viral pandemic. This would have been in 2014, And I thought it was going to be an influenza pandemic. I thought we said we were due, and I mapped out what I thought was going to happen. It wasn't going to be Ebola, but it was going to be an H1 or a flu strain. So when Ebola or when COVID hit, I was actually, I think I just finished up being head of mass casualty at our hospital system, and I had already been through H1N1. We had people forget we had a sort of a viral pandemic in the 90s too. It wasn't, we had more patients then, but they weren't as sick. And in the early days of this pandemic, the worst part was, like my wife didn't want me to go to work. I mean, she goes, listen, we have enough money. You've saved up enough, worked enough. Almost everybody my age had already retired. And we were paying attention to what was going on in Italy. And I had gotten my kids out of New York City. They were in the music industry at that time. I said, you guys have got to get out. And they kept trying to tell me why, no, everything's fine. And I finally I yelled at them on the phone. I said, you do not understand. I know human nature. All those things you think are going to happen, New York is going to shut down. Okay, get in a car. And I think they rented the last car out of New York City and made it here. And so we would go to the hospital, and it wasn't really that busy. People think that we were busting at the seams with patients. We weren't, because realized that nobody was coming in for all the other stuff, like their sore throats or little belly aches or sprained ankles or anything like that. People were terrified to come to the hospital. But what we had were a whole lot of nursing home patients, and they were all dying. I mean, they were just one after another. And we've got full respirators on, and we're holding up the phones so their loved ones can watch them die or FaceTime them in. And everyone we put on event was dying. And I'd come home at night and I'd take off all my clothes in the garage, like stark naked, and I'd throw them all in a bucket of Pine Sol. And I'd hose myself off out in the driveway, and then everybody would stay in the room, and my wife would have the shower on. I'd walk through the house without touching anything and get in the shower and just completely, try to clean myself up. And a lot of times I'd sleep in separate rooms, and you didn't know if, you kept looking around at all your partners and the other nurses. You're waiting for the first doctor to die or the first nurse to die. And the thing was, none of us were dying. Some of us were getting COVID. I didn't. But one of the things we noticed that nobody was dying, and the only ones who were dying were old people and morbidly obese people. That was it. We weren't having any kids dying. Okay. The only people that were dying were old people and really obese patients. And so we started to feel a little bit better through those summer months. And then when the vaccine came on, I think, was it September or the end of August, September that year or stuff, all of us got vaccinated. And there was like this big sigh of relief. And we knew that most of us were going to end up getting COVID, and a lot of us did, but none of us were dying from it. And I didn't get COVID for, I think, like 2 years.
So you didn't get it until like 2022.
Yeah, and it was mild by that time. I mean, it was like barely. I'm trying to think if I even tested positive. I may have just said, I think I got COVID. I'm not even sure I tested myself. So, I mean, it was so sad because there was nothing we could do. And, you'd have these, the worst part was you'd get like a real obese male that would come in, and he wasn't going to get vaccinated because he knew better. He was smarter than everybody else, even though we're sitting right there in the middle of it. I'm not getting vaccinated. They come in, be 50 years old, 300, 350 pounds, breathing 30, 40 times a minute, oxygen levels falling, and you got to put them on a vent, but they're going to die. So what do you tell them? I mean, they're going to die. I mean, they all died. And they're saying, well, I feel horrible. What can I get ivermectin? Or all that shit doesn't matter. It's too late. You're going to die. And we wouldn't say it like that. So listen, you're horribly ill, and you probably are not going to survive this. And we'd have them get on the phone, and they make the phone calls that you need to make. Call your kids, tell them you love them, tell your wife passwords for your computer, your bank account. These are probably the last words you're going to be speaking. We would literally have those conversations with people. Can you imagine? I mean, literally.
No.
And I had that conversation probably 10 times fathers, and they'd be sitting there just sobbing and crying, and I'm sitting there madder than hell, because that had they just gotten vaccinated, they'd probably just be sick and have a flu-like illness, but now they have this whole body inflammatory. I didn't see a single person that age who had gotten vaccinated die. Every single person I saw, and it was so sad, and it was so preventable. And I was so angry at the government and society and all the noise out there, when all we had to do was just say, listen, get vaccinated if you're worried about dying, and don't worry about everybody else. But the message was so skewed geopolitically, and all the verbal vomit that was coming out of everybody's mouth. And I tried to say it over and over and over and over 1,000 times, but what are you going to do?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that died that didn't have to die, and it's still sad. It's really upsetting.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I still think about some of that. I still see some of those faces and the terror, the absolute abject terror on their faces, and there's nothing you can do. I mean, you try to tell people, and they read some bullshit article about nothing, and they don't listen to the people in the trenches that are there on every day. They listen to some schmuck who's has no idea what's going on. And
yeah.
Anyways, you asked.
No, you're good. And like the two, I guess, demographics that you saw dying the most were the elderly people, and then people who weren't necessarily elderly, but they were morbidly obese. Like, you can't really fix age, right? Was there any frustration? Because that was my first thought, was like, if those are the two categories, you can't get younger, but you can get healthier. You can lose some weight. You can take care of your body a little bit. If you are that 50-year-old guy, would that have changed anything?
Yeah, but it's sort of hard to all of a sudden lose 50, 100 pounds so you don't get COVID. So, that horse is out of that barn by that time. And let me tell you, I wasn't the sveltest guy in the world. I mean, during COVID, I was pushing probably 230. I was a bigger guy. So I was actually, somewhat worried. I kept going, well, nobody's really they're a lot fatter than I am. So, but I was actually having that internal conversation with me. And I was telling friends of mine, doctor friends that were obese, I'd say, listen, don't go to work. Take the 6 months off till we have a vaccine, just stay at home. But I mean, I lost a friend. Okay. A friend of mine died of COVID early on. And, and he fit that bill. That's what he was like. And, it's sad. But yeah, I knew quite a lot of people. I mean, grew up in this community. So I had a lot of friends whose parents died. I'm on the board of a nursing home, and we lost tons of people. And there's nothing you could do.
Yeah.
Nothing you could do.
Yeah.
But kids weren't dying. We didn't see any kids that were really sick.
Well, you mentioned a second ago, and then that kind of sparks another question I just thought of, is when you have that person that you're like, hey, you need to talk to your family, like internet passwords, things like that, like get all your, essentially divulge all of that so that your loved ones know. I mean, that's something that I do as one of the co-founders of Grand Vision companies. We have a family office that we actually work with a lot of physician families on their wealth planning, their financial planning, estate planning, things like that. So we're like preparing them for the future and generational wealth and things like that. But do you think some of those things that you just talked about and those tragedies, did that shape some of your view on, even for your own family, for your wife and for your boys, like, hey, we need to get our ducks in a row. If we had any loose ends, we need to get all that.
In fact, before, when COVID hit, the first calls that I made before we started going to work is I called my financial guy, Matt Burton, who's a good friend, and I said, here's what's going on. If I get sick, I'm going to get sick quick. I'm going to die. Do this, do this, do this, do this. Put stuff in trusts. Checked on my life insurance premiums, made sure my wife had all passwords, and everything like this. Because, I thought I was going to die. I thought it was a legitimate chance I was going to die. And then, I don't know, we didn't talk about it, Nate, but I don't know if you're aware that I went to Israel right after the onset of the war.
I did not know.
And I helped, I went to Western Galilee Hospital right after south of the Lebanese border. And my wife says, why do you need to go? I said, because my kids are grown up. Okay. A lot of the other docs were volunteering to go. They had young kids, and the war was in full swing. And so I went to fill in Western Galilee, right? And Hezbollah rockets were raining down on us and stuff like that. So I had the exact same discussion with all my people and make sure that they had access to everything. And so it was something I considered.
For sure. Yeah, and I know, like, for all the members in our family office, again, 90% of them are physicians. Others are, high net worth business owners, things like that. One thing we provide to them is called a legacy folder. So it's essentially that one folder that's got, I almost think of it like the president's football, right? That's got the nuclear codes in it.
I had the exact same thing.
Yep. And so
I had the exact same thing. With a trust company here in India that I did the exact same thing. It's a big binder, has life insurance, who owns the cars, how to get access, the will, where the money goes, stocks.
That's awesome. You'd be amazed how many physicians, very successful in their careers, make a lot of money, do not have like what you have. It's very surprising for the amount of assets and the income and the future earning potential and everything that comes with being a physician from a financial perspective. They just don't prepare themselves. Not that anybody would sit there and prepare themselves for another pandemic, but or that even the first.
Well, it's interesting. One of the questions that I get a lot from a lot of my friends who have retired or stuff like this, they'll go, "Why are you still working? Why don't you retire?"
Because you love it.
I said, I do love it, but I also know that I can make a comparable amount of money probably doing something else. Okay. I have my fingers in a lot of pies and stuff like this, but my wife, I really love my wife. Okay. My wife's parents lived into her mom is in her 90s. She has a lot of longevity. Okay. My family, they're not quite as healthy, but my wife's probably going to live into her 90s. I want to make sure that my wife is taken care of into her 90s when I'm not there for the 10 or 15 years that she most likely will be without me. So every dime that I put away is, I tell them, I go, this isn't for me. This is for my wife. So everything will be fine, that you won't have anything to worry about. And I think that sometimes, I don't want to say we get a little selfish in our thinking, but my God, she gave me 3 beautiful children. She's been an incredible life partner. I'm going to make sure that she's set up for everything possible in case she has to spend 15 years without me.
Yeah. I love that straightforward, like, honest perspective that you just gave, because some people don't want to think about, like, oh, I know my spouse is going to die around this age and they're going to have, they're going to have 10, 15 years without me at some point later in life. Some people don't like to think about that. So the fact that you just, the honesty there, I certainly appreciate it.
I see us every day, and then I want to make sure, my kids, and it's also interesting, there'll be a shift that'll come up, and I still will jump at an opportunity to work. I wasn't scheduled to work like Thursday this week, and I had the day off. My wife was in Florida. I said, you know what? I think I'll go work. And the younger docs, they don't want to work. It's crazy. They don't have that kind of work ethic, and as much, or a lot of them, or they try to. Everything is about how to go part time and stuff, and I still really enjoy it, and I can't get myself to walk away from that kind of income, and I'll still do it until I can't do it.
I was going to say, the financial planner in me is like, if your wife's in Florida, you're 60, why are you in Florida with her?
Because I was working. She was actually going to visit her mom. Oh, okay. Her mom lives down there in the Boca area, and so she said, but we're going on. We literally just got back from Ontario fishing for 5 days in Northern Ontario. It was amazing, and awesome. We do. And she also travels with me to all of my speaking gigs, so which I love. So we go to all these different states and all these different small towns where different colleges are and areas that you would never typically travel, and so we get to see a lot of stuff and do things that most people don't get to do, and we're a great team, we're a great partnership, and she keeps me grounded and sane.
That's awesome. So you guys are empty nesters now, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
Think back to when you weren't. I mean, you had 3 boys. I'm going to guess they were relatively close in age. How did you balance all that went into like everything with the ER, while you're on the clock, to then with the demands that come with raising boys and keeping the wife happy?
Well, boys aren't hard to raise. You just sort of throw food on the ground and they rummage around like a bunch of pigs, and they're easy. Boy, and my wife is a girly girl. I mean, but boys, you just throw crackers in the corner, a couple hot dogs, and they're easy to care for. I'm not sure I could be a dad to girls. God bless all those parents out there.
I have 2 daughters, so thank you.
My wife. Yeah, there you go. My wife was so desperate for a girl, I had to buy her a little white Maltese dog and a pink stroller, and we still have her, and it's all groomed up and has bows and tassels in it and everything like that. It's a dog from hell, but that's her daughter. My boys were all very athletic. They're very popular. They were very self-sufficient at a young age. They were not that hard to raise, and I also wasn't one of those helicopter parents, and neither were my wife. My kids weren't scholars, okay? They're not Rhodes scholars, but they're extremely successful individuals, and they have their strengths. None of them are in medicine. So, I wasn't a stickler on grades. I wasn't a stickler on studying. It was important to me that they be good people, and they were all incredibly good people. And they could talk to adults, and they were grounded spiritually. And one played college baseball at Yeshiva University, one played golf at Yeshiva, one went to Indiana University in Bloomington. And they're so much fun, and they're great kids.
That's awesome. What a blessing to have that. And then to be able to say, I didn't have to raise my kids too much. They didn't necessarily raise themselves, but they turned out all right. Yep.
They raised themselves.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you know how you do that? You buy them a pile of dirt, okay, and you let them rummage around in the backyard. There's no better teaching aid out there than a big old dirt pile.
Absolutely.
Okay, let them build forts, get dirty, and don't I've talked about this in the book, in The Patient Room 9 Says He's God, that we did not run interference in their problems. Okay, their problems were their problems. Their mistakes and their transgressions were theirs. I'd offer them guidance, but I wouldn't solve all their problems for them. And it's interesting. The kids in the neighborhood will still tell you about this, that our yard was what we call a no whining zone.
Nice.
And it was this like running joke for years, because I had too much issues at the hospital. It was too much stressful that I was not going to be one of those guys that came home and some neighborhood kid or my kids would start, so-and-so did this or that and that. This is a no whining zone. You solve your own problems. And so kids would come over in the neighborhood and they'd start complaining, well, Zach, tripped me out on the basketball court. This is a no whining zone. Okay, you guys solve your problems yourself, or you need to leave. And what would happen is that all of a sudden the tenor would change and these kids would solve their own problems. They weren't out there beating each other up or anything, but their issues didn't become issues. They stopped being issues. And like when our little kids were, when they were little and they would get angry at each other, well, one of the first things I did was buy them boxing headgear and gloves, and they would just beat the tar out of each other in the back porch. Said, here you go, put the gloves on. And the good thing was our youngest boy was tougher than the 2 oldest, so it was all relatively balanced out in our household.
I think God did that on purpose.
And so my greatest, I think so. Yeah, but they're fun, and they still joke about it, and they all love each other dearly, and they're good sons.
That is awesome. One of the last questions I have for you: what do the next 5 years look like for Dr. Profeta?
Man, everybody asks me, when are you going to quit? And I go, tomorrow. every day I say I'm going to quit tomorrow. I'm going to keep going until I qualify for Medicare, I think. So I don't know. I mean, I'm still traveling. I've got a lot of speaking gigs coming up. I still like medicine. I am going to start winding down a little bit. It's gotten harder for me just physically to do nights as much. I think I will start cutting back. I just don't know how much. I may do something else. My oldest son and I have some real estate ventures that we're in. I have some other ventures in pharmaceuticals and in consulting and things like that. But my joy is emergency medicine. I love taking care of patients. The day that I don't love it is the day that I stop doing it.
Yeah.
And right now, I like it a lot. I don't love it completely, but I still like it an awful lot. So I'm going to keep going, and I still have something to offer. And my community, I think, still needs me. We don't have enough doctors. This fine country gave me the chance to become a physician, and I think I owe it to this country to stay and provide health care as long as I can. I think too many of us shirk that responsibility. I mean, it's an incredible gift to be allowed to be accepted to medical school, to go through residency. It's an incredible gift. And you can't ignore the fact that you've had that privilege. And part of that privilege was there because they need you to provide health care to this great nation and the great people here. And so I'm going to keep going and keep providing as much as I can. Well, and, one more person, potentially one more life.
Yeah.
Just one more.
Yeah. Well said, sir. That was great. Where can people find you? So you got the patient in room 9 says you have a plethora of writings. You're out speaking. Where can people find you?
Well, you can go to louisprofeta.com. It's LOUISPROFETA.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Reach out to me, and if you'd like me to come and speak to your parent group or your kids high school groups or stuff like that, or your kids college campus, their fraternities and sororities, you can reach out to me through louisprofeta.com or go to Greek University, which is another resource. Greek University handles my college speaking gigs. I handle all my corporate and high school and other gigs myself.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure. I'm so glad that you came on. Like I said, I've had my eye on you for the last couple months, just seeing what you're up to, and I'm glad we were able to connect. And I look forward to the time when our paths cross again in the future.
Good, Nate. You asked some good questions. You did okay, Nate.
All right, I appreciate that.
All right.
I appreciate that.
All right.
Well, thank you, sir.
Well, let me know when you have the link up.
All right.
My pleasure.